Last year, I made a sort of New Year's resolution to branch out my taste in video games, because if I'm being honest, it's gotten kind of stale. I primarily grew up with Mario games, if you couldn't tell. Fun, bubbly platformers are what my parents would buy for me as a kid, and fun, bubbly platformers are my comfort food to this day. But in recent years, I've started to have this burning desire for something more. Look, platformers are great and all, but I'd love to spend 20 plus minutes talking about, dear God, anything else. I want to cover something with adventure, with mystery, with a narrative that'll make me laugh and cry. Lucky, there's a Twink guy. Enter The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, a game that I've seen praised over the years but never took the initiative to check out. It was hard for me to come by spare money in those early years of the Switch. My initial library was... yeah. But I did eventually, finally, pick up the game from GameStop on Black Friday 2021. Yeah, I didn't really get into it. Combat, rune abilities, deadly temperatures, memories, it felt like the game was throwing a million new concepts at me, and I had to get acclimated to all of them right away or I wouldn't live to see a single divine beast restored. Now you can tell me get good or skill issue all you want, and honestly, you're not even wrong. Breath of the Wild was my first game in this series, and my first deep dive into the open world genre, so to say that I was out of my comfort zone would be an understatement. I really did try my damnedest to get into the game because I wanted to see what other people see in this game. Unfortunately, my first experience with the game was more frustrating than it was exciting. So the game returned to my shelf, and there it would rest for the next 100 years. A year had passed, and the calamity that I had once sworn to stand against was all but forgotten in the wake of a new threat: Sonic Twitter. Sonic Frontiers pre-release. It was a shit show, no doubt, but I'm honestly kind of nostalgic for that time where I would log in just to see the new conversation or debate of the day. It was honestly more fun speculating on each tidbit of new information than it was actually playing the game. I had a lot of high hopes for Sonic Frontiers, as the only comparable open-world platformer hybrid is Bowser's Fury, which was closer to a 3D World DLC that had a falling out with loading screens. Upon completing Sonic Frontiers, I surprisingly had very little to say about the game. I thought it was a fun experience and all, but Sonic Frontiers is very much another boost-style game at heart. I've already made a video expressing my thoughts on this gameplay style and more in the past, if you want to give it a watch. Wink wink. It's clear that Sonic Team put the most effort into the cyberspace stages and the mini-levels that populate the Starfall Islands, so much so that the open zones themselves feel like little more than a playable substitute for a world map. The focus on combat helped to give the open zones more substance when compared to Lake Lapcat and Bowser's Fury, but most enemies are so simple to defeat that I beat the game a second time without unlocking any skills or upgrading any stats, and I only died like 3 times. I felt little reason to engage in combat and, by extension, the world around me, other than to gather the gears that are required for progression. Hold on, what does this have to do with Zelda again? Oh yeah. For years, I've yearned for a platformer with a thrilling narrative and freedom to explore vast worlds, with fast and fluid movement to boot. Sonic Frontiers had all the pieces it needed to be my dream game, but what Sonic Team made was a sandbox platformer that's structured to give the illusion of an open-ended game. And that's fine. I learned to have fun with a game that wasn't catered to my tastes. Perhaps it was this lesson, or the similarities between the structure of Frontiers and Breath of the Wild, cyberspace to shrines, titans to divine beasts, etc., that made me have an epiphany. I was basically just asking for an open world game, but with platforming, and Sonic Frontiers served as an adequate teaser of what the open world genre has to offer, but I knew at some point I'd have to swallow my pride and just play the damn open world game. Round 2 of Breath of the Wild was a much more enjoyable experience. Between my playthrough of Baby's first open world and the knowledge I retained from playing Breath of the Wild once before, I was much more naturally immersed in the world of Hyrule my second time around. I didn't feel like I was blindly running in circles anymore. In fact, I felt in total control of my playthrough. I could choose the order in which to complete main objectives, which enemies to fight and which ones to ignore, which shrines to complete and in what order, and how fast I could upgrade my health and stamina. I was finally starting to understand the appeal of the open world genre, giving players the freedom to engage with a massive world however they choose. But of course, this design philosophy doesn't come without its caveats. I found it very tedious how slow climbing mountains and towers is, and how fast your stamina drains, especially so when enemies nearby would attack me while climbing. Sometimes enemies move way faster than you and force you into a battle where you only have low durability weapons left. Weather and temperature mechanics are super annoying and only serve to slow down your progress. And yeah, I know that's the whole point of these mechanics. It wouldn't be any fun if you could rush through main objectives and side quests, and it would enable the average player to skip large chunks of the game. But that doesn't really change the fact that sometimes these mechanics get to be a bit much. Divine Beasts are another major weak point of the game for me. These National Geographic-ass machines essentially replace the dungeons of older Zelda titles, but they have these awful gimmicks that require pausing the game and setting the orientation of a dozen different parts to a very specific angle to make any progress. The 3D maps that accompany them are genuinely incomprehensible. All of the bosses are some variation of Ganon, so there's not much creativity in that department. The champions, as they're called, only appear during the main storyline in these Divine Beasts, yet they overshadow their descendants that actually help Link get to the beasts, so hardly any of the important characters you interact with are fleshed out in any way. And I feel the same can be said for pretty much the whole game's narrative. It's a shame that most characters fit into a generic archetype and the story is another basic good versus evil shtick, because Breath of the Wild otherwise does a phenomenal job of immersing you in a sprawling fantasy world. It's nice to see that the inhabitants of the world around you hold optimism in the face of a post-apocalyptic setting, but narrative-wise, that's the only standout aspect to me. I had a lot of fun beating Breath of the Wild, but I wasn't exactly wowed as I expected to be, considering how beloved this game is. Unlike most games that stick with me, games that tend to leave me with strong emotions that quickly burn out, Breath of the Wild was much more of a slow burn. It's a game where I look back on everything I've done fondly, even if at the moment I was bored or frustrated. I guess it's sort of like life in that aspect, the way that imagining the past can be an experience of its own. So even if Breath of the Wild wasn't my favorite game, it's an incredibly unique experience that I truly believe can't be replicated by any other game.
Holy shirt balls, is that a Nintendo, mommy? Oh, Wooga! My fat ass thought Nintendo was a family-friendly company during the Wii and Wii U era. Wowie! Breath of the Who?
The Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom. The most anticipated game of 2023 and the long-awaited sequel to Breath of the Wild. Yeah, I thought it was alright. Maybe it's because I've only been a Breath of the Wild fan for like a couple of months, but I thought Tears of the Kingdom was a decent expansion of the world and design philosophies of the first game, with enough improvements and unique content to warrant another $60. Oh, look, I'm sure that longtime fans of the series will find $70 worth of enjoyment out of this title, but I wasn't about to blow a next-gen amount of cash on a Switch game. What do you take me for, some kind of idiot? Fuck. I ended up using a Switch Online game voucher to pre-order Tears of the Kingdom for $50, and for that price, my god, this is a fantastic game. To avoid going into spoiler territory, I'll only be covering what happens up to the Great Sky Island, the tutorial area of the game that replaces the Great Plateau from Breath of the Wild. Surprisingly, the game doesn't start with a title screen, but a title card and cutscene that sets the tone for the adventure to follow. Link and Zelda are investigating in the depths below Hyrule Castle, hoping to find answers about a mysterious substance called gloom that's causing people to fall ill. Deep within the depths, they come across some murals and a mummy being held in place by a mysterious arm. The mummy awakens, attacking Link and destroying the Master Sword and Link's arm in the process. It then raises Hyrule Castle into the sky, causing the ground below Link and Zelda to give out and for Zelda to fall into the depths. Link is saved by the strange arm and later awakens on the Great Sky Island. This single cutscene already has more going for it than basically the entire story of the Great Calamity from Breath of the Wild, which does wonders for investing players in the game's setting. Then comes the Great Sky Island, perhaps one of the most well-designed tutorials in any video game. Guided by Rauru, a mysterious ghost who provided Link with his new right arm, Link visits the shrines on the island to restore the arm's power and enter the Temple of Time. These shrines give Link the new abilities of the game: Ultra Hand, Ascend, Fuse, and Recall. Not only do these abilities massively expand the philosophy of player choice and lend their way to more engaging combat and puzzles, they are insane on a technical level. I've seen a lot of seasoned game developers share their astonishment at how these abilities function flawlessly with one another and with practically any object in the world, all while the rest of the game's physics and mechanics run in the background. Tears of the Kingdom was essentially in a finished state for a full year and delayed for quality assurance, something that is unheard of in the modern gaming industry, and I think that delay was an incredibly smart move on Nintendo's part, considering how Link's abilities are both easily understandable to any player and infinitely variable in what they can accomplish. All in all, the Great Sky Island took me about 3 hours to get through, and the game does a phenomenal job at both keeping the player invested and entertained through its lengthy tutorial, and helping the player naturally learn and master advanced mechanics without outright holding their hand. Besides some much needed improvement in dungeon design and boss encounters, most of the pros and cons I listed for Breath of the Wild can also be applied to Tears of the Kingdom. The game has some moments that are boring and tedious, some that are peaceful, and some that are outstanding. But looking back at what I built and accomplished through trial and error is always an engaging experience of its own, sometimes even more so than actual gameplay. Especially so with how much more fleshed out the story is with its new cast of characters and Zelda's bigger role in the story. It took me around 20 minutes to clear every main objective in Breath of the Wild, and around twice that time for Tears of the Kingdom. The one major complaint I have with Tears of the Kingdom is its gloom mechanic. Covering the floors and enemies of the depths, coming into contact with gloom will reduce Link's maximum hearts until he returns to the surface. Though the depths are a massive addition to the game, nearly the size of Hyrule itself, I found myself steering clear of chasms because of how easy it is to run into gloom due to low visibility. During my playthrough, I drew a lot of comparisons between the depths and the deep woods in Super Mario Odyssey's Wooded Kingdom. Both provide an unparalleled atmosphere and terrifying encounters, but not much else. There was never a point where I felt I was missing out by sticking to the surface in either game. However, unlike in Odyssey, there are points in the main storyline for Tears of the Kingdom where you are forced into the depths, and have to deal with gloom with no way of returning to the surface to heal. These are easily my least favorite moments of the game, and they sort of soured my overall impression of the game. I also found it strange how little the story of Breath of the Wild connects with Tears of the Kingdom, with practically no Sheikah technology present and most characters outright ignoring the events of the Great Calamity. But nitpicks aside, Tears of the Kingdom is a massive improvement to its predecessor in nearly every aspect. I still consider Super Mario Galaxy 2 to be the best sequel of all time, as it excels in different areas from its predecessor and doesn't outright replace it. But even if Breath of the Wild has been shown up by its cooler younger brother, I still believe it's a perfect entry point to the mechanics and design philosophies of the Legend of Zelda series and the open world genre. And now that I finally have a handful of Zelda games under my belt, I can't wait to see what the rest of the series has to offer. Maybe I'll take a look at a retro classic like Ocarina of Time, or maybe I'll dust off my Wii U and give Wind Waker HD another try. The possibilities are truly endless. Holy shit, is that Amy Rose?